I've received nothing but goodness. I've tested and tasted your grace. I was so lost till I fell at the cross and got saved. Oh, I got saved. I'm undone by the
Tonight we'll study the whole armor of God, as it's called in Ephesians 6. Every Christian is exhorted to put on all the armor, which will help him to fight his devilish enemy and win. The idea of standing firm shows up no less than 4 times in this passage about the armor of God. Verse 11, so that you can take your stand. Verse 13, so you may be able to stand your ground. Verse 14, stand firm. This is the idea in this passage that we as Christians will be gritty. I'm sure you understand it's figurative language. We're not called to go to the army surplus store and literally buy battle clothing of an ancient military man. Let me put up a photo from a monument in the city of Rome called Trajan's Column. You can go see it today. It dates to near the time of the Apostle Paul and the writing of the Book of Ephesians. Now, if you look closely at the photo and compare it with Paul's description of armor, you'll find that Paul describes a soldier who's even better equipped than the soldiers on Trajan's Column. Paul's description is of a soldier who is prepared to the maximum of battle readiness. In other words, Paul is describing not the typical Roman soldier in the book of Ephesians. He's describing what is more like a Roman army ranger. Few Roman soldiers were decked out as completely as Paul describes. Additionally, suppose you meet a Christian on the street in those days, in the market, on the street. Almost none of them are going to look anything like Paul's description. In the Holy Land, or Palestine as people called it, where the church was born, Paul had just visited there before his voyage to Rome. The typical clothing of the common people is usually depicted quite accurately by the movies about the times of Jesus. They wore a lightweight inner garment and an outer cloak. Sometimes they added a scarf. Usually they had sandals. Neither Jesus nor any of the first Christians wore armor. Then as Paul brought the gospel to the West, to the Greek Ephesus, and finally to Rome, the clothing would have changed just a little bit as Paul got further away from Jerusalem. The Greeks also wore a simple undergarment called a chiton, lightweight square of fabric that was gathered around the belt. It might go to mid-thigh in length, maybe to the knees or maybe even to the ground. And over that was some sort of really ample, heavier material for a tunic. They would wear that as heavy as needed for the weather or the activity. I remember that Paul once told Timothy to bring him the heavy cloak that he'd left behind. The point I'm trying to make is that the typical clothes of Greece and Rome didn't offer much protection or armoring, especially to the Christian martyrs of the first century. They didn't turn to Jesus and start wearing military protection. Yet, inwardly, they were a gritty people, courageous and filled with boldness and faith. Their clothing may have been flimsy, but their hearts were the hearts of warriors. Their minds were fully convinced. Their souls were totally committed to Jesus and his mission. So tonight, as you talk about the full armor of God, keep in mind that the armor is figurative language describing the inner grit, the inner courage of God's people. Have a wonderful home fellowship tonight. God bless.
There's a river of gladness that pours from a